Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Adam Gordon. I'm an edutainer here at ITProTV, and I'm your host for our How to Use Zoom series. In this episode, we're going to take a look at settings associated with creating and actually starting a Zoom meeting. Pretty important stuff because most of us are probably looking to use Zoom primarily, although not exclusively, for meetings. Now, believe it or not, the majority of the settings associated with meetings in Zoom are actually not going to be in the application itself. We'll take a look at settings in a minute, and you'll see there's really nothing there to speak of that deals with meetings. We do have all these elements on our landing page right over here that do allow us to create a meeting, schedule it, share it, set it up, etc., and join it. But that's not the same thing as settings. Those are just elements that we can execute on. The settings we're going to be paying attention to are actually over in the web portal, and we're going to go over there in just a moment and take a look at what they are. Let's navigate over here quickly to our settings icon, upper right-hand corner, as you can see right at the top of the page in the upper right area of the app below your icon, whether you've added a picture to it or not at this point. And when you click on settings, our settings will start up and they'll show up here. And you can see as I go down the list, we've been in here looking at some of them in some prior episodes. We do have video, audio, chat settings. We can see our share screen settings, virtual background. There are elements of settings that do impact the way we deal with meetings, specifically our share screen settings, in particular about what we can do when we are in a meeting. Our virtual background settings, we've been through this and talked about how these are set. And our recording settings associated with local and/or cloud recording, depending on whether we have a simple basic subscription, free in other words, or we have a paid subscription, depending on what you're doing. And we certainly can specify some settings here. You'll see choose a location for recorded files when the meeting ends, for instance, right? Record a separate audio file for each participant who speaks. These definitely are settings that interact around elements of control associated with a meeting. But the bulk of the settings are going to be found in the portal. So let's go ahead, let's get out of here, and let's go into the portal. I'm just going to minimize this. I've already got the portal set up. We've already logged in, and we're already ready to go. And I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to zoom in and show you where we are. So we navigate in the left in the navigation area. Under Personal, down at the bottom here, very last item under Personal, we'll see Settings. And as I look at Settings, I see I have 3 tabs, Meeting, Recording, and Telephone. And this is where we're going to see all of the settings that are important to us. All 3 of these, by the way, are all related to settings associated with meetings. Even though it says recording, it's about recording a meeting. Even though it says telephone, it's the telephone phone numbers and the list of phone numbers associated with onboarding for a meeting using audio. So all of this has to do with meetings, just so you know. Let's start by looking at our Meetings tab. You'll see we can begin here, schedule a meeting. Obviously some very important settings there that will be of interest to us. And as we scroll down, we can see we have host video, participants video. I showed you in some earlier episodes that I like to onboard to a meeting, and I have my settings in my app set to not start video when I start the meeting because I don't want the video to come up and be a distraction. And if there are low bandwidth issues I'm associating in an area, let's say in meeting from an area that I may not have good connectivity. I travel a great deal for work, for instance, and I usually wind up in places where I may not always have great connectivity. Starting with video immediately sucks a lot of bandwidth immediately into the app and can cause a crash. It may even cause the app to stop working. It could certainly cause a bad experience in terms of the quality of the meeting. So probably don't want to start with start with video, but rather you may want to opt into it. And we'll show you when we get into our episode about how to actually host a meeting. We'll show you how to turn that on from the meeting control panel that shows up at the bottom. But the settings can be modified so you can immediately force that meeting to start with video if you'd like to. Just simply toggle them so that whether it's the host and or all the participants or both will start, you can just simply turn them on and off, as you can see right there. In addition, you'll see audio type, determine how participants can join the audio portion of the meeting. When they join, you can let them choose to use their computer audio or use a telephone. You'll see that. You've seen that in a couple of episodes as I've onboarded and shown you when we did the virtual background, for instance. We spun up a meeting just to show you what it looks like. You saw I joined with my computer audio. And again, I can hard code that and give complete flexibility here, telephone and computer audio. only telephone, only computer audio. It's up to me to decide how I want those settings to be set. Do I want to allow participants to join the meeting before the host arrives? I can toggle that on. It's off by default. I mentioned the personal meeting ID, what's called the PMI, when scheduling a meeting, and the fact that we have that and we can use that to spin up a meeting. We'll see that in an upcoming episode, but I showed that to you earlier in the series, and I showed you where to find it, which was back in the desktop application. When you go in and you look at the actual meetings, you can see that your PMI is there as you go to set up a meeting. We can also use that to start an instant meeting, so meetings are linked to us automatically. We could specify that only authenticated users can join meetings, only allowing users that are already participating and authenticated to be able to join. Require a password when scheduling new meetings. And the list goes on and on, as you can see. There's quite a number of them here, including specifying passwords for instant, as well as passwords for personal meeting IDs as we go down. Enabling passwords and meeting link for one-click join, and you have to provide that by default. We could specify a password even for participants joining by phone. And we can mute participants on entry. That's an especially important one because a lot of times people will come up in a meeting. They have a lot of noise going on in the background, especially as more and more of us are working from home. There may be all sorts of things going on. And as a result, it may be really noisy. And not everybody remembers to mute themselves when they join or doesn't even realize that they're not muted. They take for granted that they are. So this is nice because you can automatically mute everybody. I do find it's important to tell people you're muting them so they know when they go to speak and nothing's happening because nobody can hear them that they're muted, but it's probably safer to mute them by default than it is to leave the mic open and hope that nobody's going to come on with a lot of background noise and all sorts of stuff. You can also specify upcoming meeting reminders. So you can set out a meeting reminder, and we can do that from the Zoom desktop client. The reminder can be specified in terms of the time that it will be sent. Again, all of these have to be opted in and turned on. You'll notice that's just the background settings. Then we have what are called in-meeting basic settings, things like requiring encryption, whether chat will be allowed in the meeting and made available to all participants. I could prevent users in a meeting from saving chat so they can only write something in there, but they have no record of it. They can't save it, which we'll take a look at in one of the upcoming episodes around how we can save chat and create a chat history and a transcript from meetings. Very important to note that. You'll see we allow one-on-one or private chats in a meeting between meeting participants. Now, if you saw one of the earlier episodes in our series where we focused on chat, I showed you could spin up both private and group chats, and you have that capability. Remember, but I made a distinction in that episode. I said there's really two functions or kinds of chats that we focus on. The chat that we did in that episode was really instant messaging chat outside of a meeting. And then we have the meeting function that allows chat to take place as well, but those chats are separate from the standalone instant messaging chat that we did that special episode on. So a little bit of stuff to keep track of, but it is important to note these settings are focused on the in-meeting chat function, just to be clear. We can auto-save those chats, so we automatically have a transcript of them and have them available. We don't have to worry about asking someone to do that if we choose to set that setting. Again, these settings may look different for you. You may have questions about whether these things can happen or not, or somebody may have set them and you wonder, how's that going on? Well, it's because somebody came in and set these for all the people in your organization, or maybe somebody has gone in and set them and you weren't aware of the fact that they are. We could specify that file transfers can take place, that hosts and participants can be allowed to send those through the in-meeting chat function. You'll see that can be turned on. And we have an ability to send feedback to Zoom. That's turned on by default. You can opt in or out. But we can do an end-of-meeting experience feedback survey. Again, very important, especially those of you that are students attending classes now remotely using Zoom. If your teacher, your trainer, your professor, whoever it is maybe doing that because the school is asking them to. Now you know why that's happening. For businesses and business users that are perhaps interested in getting feedback from their members, from their people on the experience of those meetings. If you're seeing a survey now, you know why. And we can respond with a thumbs up or a thumbs down and specify kind of feedback as a result of that. We can allow co-hosting, so we can have more than one host in a meeting, which is important if multiple people have to present. And that is on by default. Again, very important to think about that. Otherwise, we only have one person who is the host and controls the meeting. And if we have an agenda where maybe different people have to control, speak, things like that, it may not be set up correctly. That can be a bit of a challenge. Polling, we have to turn on polling separate from feedback, as we just took a look at. This allows you to add polls to the meeting controls to survey attendees during the meeting. Again, in a class in particular, those of you that are attending and using Zoom to attend your classes as students, and even those of you that may be professors or teachers, educators that want to know more about how to use Zoom with your students, because you're being asked to do that by your education institutions. You can turn on the polling function. And by doing that, you'll see it's just a very simple toggle on. We now have that capability. Creating the poll is done when we set the meeting up and launch the meeting. So that'll be separate. We'll take a look at that in one of our other episodes. But enabling it, as you can see, is really very straightforward and really doesn't require much additional interaction, as you can see. You'll notice here there's a little V. I'm just hovering and showing you that this feature is available only at a certain version or later. There's a couple of them. There's one right here as well. As you can see, this one's only available in version 4 or later. Polling's available in a slightly older version, 3.5, whatever. It's good to note that if you're playing with the settings. Again, if you download and start using Zoom relatively recently in the last few weeks, let's say of February, beginning of March, as many of us had to start working remotely as things were becoming a bit of a problem because of the coronavirus concerns, you'll probably have the most recent version of Zoom, and that's in the 4.6 and even later series. And as a result, these features will definitely be available. But if you've been using Zoom for a while, you're just here to brush up on some features and learn some new tips and tricks maybe you weren't aware of, or you just want to refresh what you already know. Versioning becomes important if you've been using the product for a while. So it is good just to see that and to know what that little square is and why that's kind of happening there, in case you were wondering. All right, so we see polling. We allow hosts, or the host rather, to put an attendee on hold, allow the ability to show the meeting control toolbar always, as opposed to letting it show up and then go away. The behavior is that it pops up in the beginning as you onboard, and then it goes away after about 20 seconds, and you have to hover at the lower edge of the meeting screen to bring it back. A lot of people find that to be a little disconcerting, confusing. They prefer to see it all the time. It's easy just to turn that on right here. Show the Zoom window or windows during share screen, so you can always make sure that when somebody is screen sharing, that the Zoom window where you can see the meeting controls and stuff is still there. It shrinks down to a very small, a little bit bigger than a postage stamp size window, and it sits off to the right. You can move it around. It's actually just positionable. It doesn't interfere with the screen share. It's just for you to see it on your side. Nobody else sees it when you're presenting, in case you're wondering about that. I get that a lot. If I do that, will everybody see it when I screen share? Absolutely not. It's really just for you to see if you want to see it. And then screen sharing, allow hosts and participants to share content during meetings. Obviously important who can do that. By default, all participants. Who can share when someone else is sharing? By default, only the host can do that. You can easily see how that would get out of hand really quickly if lots of people were jumping in trying to grab that sharing capability without necessarily thinking about that or realizing that. It would be a free-for-all. So that's not a good setting to change, but allowing all participants to share may be good. Again, if you're in an education area, you want your students as a professor or as an educator to be able to share and show what's going on. Good to know. If you're in a meeting where lots of people may have to put content up, again, good to know. And by default, that is set up, but we can modify that if necessary. Disable the desktop and or screen share for users turned off, but we can do that as well. We do allow annotation and annotation tools on shared screens, writing on the screen to make notes, which are captured. We allow whiteboarding. We'll take a look at a lot of these settings and capabilities in upcoming episodes later in the series. And also notice, by the way, that we can specify that we want to auto-save whiteboard content when sharing is stopped, capturing that as part of the meeting and part of the transcript function, so that users that may not have been able to attend or may have been there but want to go back and review can actually watch those recordings and actually also see all the whiteboard content. Again, I'm thinking about, in particular, education settings where you're doing an event with students or presenting, and you have to have people pay attention to, have notes for, but also maybe see what was being done. Whiteboarding can be very valuable. We also allow remote control. Someone who is sharing can allow others to take control of the shared content. So if perhaps either a presenter or teacher is presenting sharing content, maybe wants to turn control over to a member of the audience or a student to ask them to do something or indicate some sort of thing that they have to show mastery of, they can easily do that. And you as the host can also take control of their presentation while they are presenting if you want to show them something or perhaps point something out to them. So this works both ways. Nonverbal feedback, very important. They can express by clicking on icons in the participants panel, and they can express options. You could raise your hand, you could show emojis, all sorts of stuff, which may be valuable depending on what you're doing. And allow remove participants to rejoin. If somebody has come out for some reason, they can rejoin if you allow them to. And then we have advanced settings where you have things like a breakout room, where you can have split separate areas, and people can go meet in sub-rooms as part of a bigger meeting. Again, this would be great if you're teaching a class and you want to break students out as an educator into smaller groups where they can work on projects, then bring everybody back. You have that capability in line in real time during the quote-unquote meeting, the class event that may take a couple of hours. You could break them out into private study rooms and have them work for a bit and then bring them back. If you're presenting and you then want to be able to break people up in maybe a normal corporate meeting into working groups. Maybe this is going to be a dev session where you're doing some development work and you want the dev teams to split up. Maybe this is part of your DevOps and or your agile project or development flow, and you want to break those teams out, have them work on different stories or different project elements, and they can go and do that as part of a broader meeting that everybody can come back into from time to time to feedback. Maybe you're doing some sort of hackathon or build-a-thon or some sort of remote connection where you want a lot of people to collaborate, but then you want them to go off and work on their own and come back. There's all sorts of ways where I can imagine breakout rooms become incredibly valuable, and you want to be able to use them. So keep in mind, these are advanced settings, but can be very valuable if you choose to put them to work. We do have remote support where you can support remote participants using some external tools beyond the meeting. Closed captioning, if there are accessibility requirements or concerns for anybody who may need that, that can be turned on. Very important to know where those capabilities are if there are or is a need for them. You could save those captions as well. And we also, and I showed you some of these settings in one of the earlier episodes where we allow potentially for people to take over camera control, add group HD video. The group HD video, by the way, is not available in the free version. This is a pay-only feature. Majority of these settings are available in both, but the group HD video in particular is a pay-only version, just so you know. We can identify guests that are in a meeting or a webinar as guests if we want them to be flagged accordingly. Can auto-answer groups in the chat and only show default emails when sending email invites as opposed to perhaps using other kinds of emails, like formal email addresses for everybody as participants. And you can see as we go down, there is just almost an endless array of settings. But the waiting room in particular is one that I like. This allows you to put people into a holding room, a little web page, or if you're using the app, a little app page that comes up that says, hey, the participants are in this waiting room. When the host comes and starts the meeting, you'll automatically be onboarded and join. Again, I could think if you're in an education setting and you're waiting for that class to start and you have, as an educator, maybe multiple classes back-to-back scheduled, you could easily set up that waiting room and force the students to wait there for their class until you start up. Great for corporate meetings as well, but notice it is turned off by default, so be aware of that. Do you show a join from browser link where you can bypass the Zoom application download process and just let them, whoever they are, the attendees, join directly from the web browser? This is great if people are unable to download, install, or run applications because of corporate restrictions on corporate laptops or corporate devices. So please be aware of that. But Zoom does indicate that the meeting experience is limited in the browser, meaning you're not going to have as fully featured, as fully rich and capable a set of tools and interaction capabilities in the browser using the web-only function as you would if you have the app. That's up to you. But notice it is enabled by default because we want people to have complete flexibility and not be barred from joining because they can't download an app all of a sudden. So do be aware of that. And then under email notifications, we have the capability here for attendees to join meeting before the host. We talked about this when a meeting is canceled. These are all notifications, meaning the Zoom system will send emails out to users when a variety of these events happen. You can see as we scroll down, again, there's a whole bunch of them. What I'm going to do is scroll back up. Just got one or two others under other there. We could set the default language for the email, by the way, so you can localize it. You could see a preview of that email. And you could also specify scheduling privilege here at the bottom. Now, that's a whole bunch of settings, but that's only one of the 3 tabs we have for the meeting settings. There's also recording and telephone. I want to quickly show you both because there's a couple of settings in each that will be important. Let's zoom in and take a look at recording. And when we go to recording, you'll see that we have the options here to specify local versus cloud recordings, how they will take place. Local recordings allow the host to be able to give participants permission to store a recording locally on their machine. Again, I'm thinking of education in particular where students may want to record the class sessions because there's really no good way for them to do that in this kind of an environment without that capability. A lot of you as educators, when I was teaching in university and when I still do teach, I allow my students to record. They can come right up and put a tape recorder on the desk if they want to, right? Or if we're doing an over-the-web event, we allow them to record if they choose to. So this is an important setting, turned on by default. They'll have a copy of it locally. They can play that back. And as an educator, you want to know that is enabled by default. But if, for whatever reason, the organization policy, the education institution policy is sorry, we can't do that, then you have to come in and disable that, and at least you know where to go. Cloud recording allows the host to save the recording and save it to the cloud, meaning there'll be a record of it archived on the Zoom servers. Again, this is going to allow you to save that, make it available with a link later, things like that for participants that may not have been able to attend live, and or if you blocked local recording and don't want users to have a separate copy so that they can give that out or do something with it, but only want them to view the recording that's stored in the cloud and have permissions associated with it. So you can only allow them maybe read-only or view-only access where they can't copy it locally. They can listen to it online. You could do that if you do a cloud recording. So we can see that we can record the active speaker, have all sorts of options about what we do, record audio only. So maybe we don't record the video, the whiteboarding, we just record the audio. We could save chats and decide to have that as part of the recording or not. All of this can be turned on, off, enabled, disabled, made by default available, made by default not available, really just depending on how you choose to mix and match your settings, as you can see. We have advanced cloud recordings. We can timestamp the recording. That may be important if you want to be able to tell people, go to this point in the recording to find this. Display participants' names in the recording. A lot of people do and don't like that. There may be privacy concerns, so you want to think about that. Education space, again, you may not want a recording of everybody with student names. There may be FERPA compliance concerns and other compliance concerns there, so you want to make sure you're aware of that, but you can obviously modify accordingly. Audio transcripts can be created. They are by default, and we can also save panelist chat to the recording if there is going to be a chat that goes on, so just be aware of that. Recording meetings can be automatically set to start and to record as soon as the meeting starts. It doesn't by default, but you can easily see that we can do that. I mentioned that we can block and only allow authenticated users with certain permissions to see recordings if they're recorded using the cloud option. And you'll see right there, we have capabilities to only allow authenticated users and require passwords to be able to access shared cloud recordings, things like that. And we can auto-delete a cloud recording after so many days, archiving it, and thinking about both corporate and education use cases here, where we may want to keep recordings till the end of the semester, then get rid of them. Companies may have e-discovery concerns about discoverable information in recordings of meetings and how long we have to keep that for based on retention policies. We can monitor and keep track of all of that here with no trouble. The host can delete cloud recordings is turned on by default. You'll see, but we can control that. And we can put a disclaimer in there about recordings, which is important. You want to make sure people know that they are being recorded and that they're opting in. You have to give people the right to be able to do that and the right to say, no, I'm not interested. I want to leave. I don't want to be recorded. And the time to do that is not after the meeting started when the recording's already running verbally. The time to do that is a recording disclaimer at the beginning of the opt-in onboarding process so that you follow the proper normal way of doing this that legally is going to shield you, shield the organization from any liability if somebody claims later they were not informed properly about being recorded. Not saying that will happen, just pointing out it can't. So just be aware of the fact we have quite a number of settings in here, as you can see, as we get to the bottom. And some will be more valuable than others. And finally, on our telephone tab, you can see as we zoom in here, that we have the ability to show numbers in our email for onboarding. We show the link for Zoom International Dial-In numbers by default because we don't know where people will join meetings from. Many of us may only have a limited geography for people to attend, but we could easily have people attending from outside that geography, maybe even outside the region or the country we're in. So by default, it's a good idea to have that, and you can obviously turn that on or off. We could see that the toll numbers, the toll call numbers for various countries, you could see alphabetically as we go, are listed there, the default ones. It says only the IT admin can make changes for this setting, meaning you have to be the admin of the Zoom system that you're onboarding into for your corporate entity to be able to make changes, but you can go in and do that if you need to. And you'll see down here, we can see all the numbers. There's a little link to let us see that if we want to. We can enable third-party audio. We can specify global dial-in countries and regions, and by default, United States of America, where I'm localized to, is there. But we also have an option to mask phone numbers in the participant list, which a lot of people like, especially if they're calling in from home on their cell phones or on perhaps their home phones, and they don't want their home numbers being given out, especially if guests and strangers are in those meetings. Very important to think about that. Important in education environments where, again, we may have students joining using their personal cell phones. Very likely that's the case. Maybe joining from home on their home phones. Again, very likely that we don't want that information being given out, even if it's just the students and the professor. You never know, and you want to always err on the side of caution. So you can easily turn that on, and you'll see what it does is it asterisks out parts of the phone number so that they cannot be seen. Very simple to do that. All right, so these are all the settings associated with how we use the various Zoom meeting capabilities and control them to our advantage. Lots of stuff going on in some of these episodes. You want to take the time, go back and watch them, slow them down. We're putting time codes in for you to find various things to try to be as easy as we can, make it as easy as we can for you to search for certain things. But take advantage of the detailed walkthroughs in these setting episodes so you can see all of the little nooks and crannies that you can get into in Zoom. You may not have realized some of these things were available to you, and you may not have realized that even though they're available, that you can manipulate them and what they're used for. So it's always good to take your time to see those. I'm going to be back with a lot more episodes in our series as we continue, but until I am, I'm going to wish you happy Zooming. I'll see you soon. Check out the playlist for more videos on how to use Zoom, and be sure to subscribe to the ITProTV channel. I'm Adam Gordon, and thanks for watching.